Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and welcome to this Mythic Plus Week Analyzed. This week's affixes are Tyrannical, Teeming, and Volcanic, with, of course, Awakened. This is an interesting set of affixes because it's a very different week depending on what level keystone you're going to be playing this week. If you are like a, world first level player, or if you're used to watching streams of world first keyers doing keys, this is going to be a week where people will not be doing keys as high as they were doing last week, which was Fortified, Sanguine, Grievous. But Fortified, Sanguine, and Grievous, I don't know, those are harder affixes, right, than Tyrannical, Teeming, Volcanic, right? Tyrannical, Teeming, Volcanic, you're not actually going to have to deal with too much mechanics as a result of the affixes. But it is a little bit slower, and it does scale a little bit more out of control into the really high keys because Tyrannical is there mostly, and Teeming as well. Those are two affixes in particular that in really high keys have a surprisingly huge amount of impact on the timer, even though they don't have a huge amount of impact on the actual difficulty of executing the dungeon for the most part. And we'll talk about a couple of Teeming exceptions later. And then Volcanic, pretty much a non-affix for pretty much everybody, with a couple of boss fights being exceptions, mainly like the last one of Underrot, where you just get a bunch of volcanoes under you the whole time as that fight progresses, especially on Tyrannical, so that's going to be one to actually watch out for. So yeah, really high keys, probably not going to be done at the 28s, 29s. The World First 29 was done last week. Not going to see a 29 done this week. Probably not going to see a 28 done this week. Maybe a couple 27s, though. Maybe a 28 by some enterprising team. Especially in a couple of the dungeons, it might definitely be possible. But many of them are going to be pretty prohibitive because of that Tyrannical affix there. Now, if you're somebody who is pushing Radar.io score and you are not at like 5,000 score or maybe 4,000 score or above, this is actually a great week to do it. This is a week where the affixes are pretty easy and you can just focus on doing the dungeon right and executing it properly and getting through the dungeon, and you're not going to have something like a Sanguine disaster, like a bolstering disaster, like Grievous killing you. All of those things that could happen on previous weeks, even on previous good weeks, previous push weeks, where you saw some top teams, making world first keys, those weeks had things that were hard but not slow if well executed. This week, there's a little bit more of a tax that's going to be applied to every single group, but if you're doing keys at a low enough level where you can pay that tax, it's a pretty easy week. Especially if you're just doing like echo farming of some kind, this might be one of the best. This is probably the best week on the calendar for just jamming and farming echoes. And like if you're blasting through 15s or whatever keystone level, this is the week to do that. This is a fantastic week for that. All right, let's talk a little bit about some specific dungeons here. I mentioned that teaming not really a huge issue in some dungeons. In some dungeons, you pretty much just do the same thing, and there's like a couple more random guys that don't matter. In some dungeons, that's not the case. So in King's Rest, there's like an extra teaming caster in the first room, which means there's an extra pull in the first room. There's like a big extra robot in Machimba's room. There's extra pulls on the bridge. There's an extra brute there and stuff. All of these things mean that teaming in King's Rest really slows you down because it adds a bunch of mandatory pulls to your pathing, and that just adds a bunch of time, which then factored in with the fact that you also need much more time for the bosses because it's Tyrannical, makes it a pretty daunting prospect this week. It's a week where even if you're used to doing it at, whatever keystone level, the timer is going to get you by surprise. This is going to be a week where you just get to the end of the dungeon and you're like, where did my time go? And that's where it went. Shrine of the Storm a little bit like that as well. Teaming in Shrine of the Storm really adds a lot of extra pulls required. Doesn't really force you to choose exactly where to get them, but most non-teaming routes in Shrine like barely manage to skip a bunch of pulls that group finds awful. And when teaming is active, usually you have to start adding not even just a few of those, but like a lot of those pulls that you don't like into your route to make your count in Shrine. So that's another one that I don't really like on teaming. Ataldazar also has some problems on teaming because Ataldazar, I don't know why I walked forward here and just fell off the roof, but I was going to open my MDT. Right. Ataldazar has some RNG with its teaming mobs. Let me see if I can show you that. There's like these two can spawn, and or these three can spawn, and or these three can spawn, and that can be pretty annoying because like often you might want to go left and grab all of these green enemies, but it's not as possible if these purple enemies are here. It is still possible. You can do it with the right combination of CC, but it's not something that a lot of groups really know how to do, and it's got a huge chance of going wrong because the Confessors even will dispel CC, so you need to do it the right way to make sure that doesn't happen. So Taldazar, pretty tricky one on teaming. I would say that, okay, my biggest tip for Taltazar this week is just do the mid pack. Anytime it's teaming week in a Taltazar, I just say do the mid pack, and that will stop you from having to go way out of your way and grab a bunch of random stuff off to the sides that you don't want to pull. I think it's the least bad option this week. Anyways, don't really want to go into just dungeon by dungeon suggestions because I have a video on that from 12 weeks ago that I'll have linked in the description. So if you want to go and hear me talking about dungeon by dungeon routes, that would be the video to go and do that. But yeah, just explaining, that's just a quick explanation of why Taltazar is rough. Other than that, just in terms of how you set up your characters this week, go for AoE damage. I know it's a tyrannical week, but teaming I think is more impactful, and AoE damage is going to be more impactful on speeding up your dungeon, except for in dungeons where the single target is going to change you from wiping to not wiping, right? So like, if single target's going to make you kill a boss 20 seconds faster, it's not worth doing it because the AoE damage is going to make you kill the rest of the dungeon 4 minutes faster. But if the single target damage is going to help you make a DPS check, like on the last boss of Siege, or help you skip a tantrum on Kragmaw or whatever, then we have a different situation, right? Then then it's kind of a binary thing, a switch that it's flicking that says, okay, now I can actually kill this boss instead of wiping to it. And in that case, that's when you'd want to shift a little bit more towards the single target. Anyways, those are just some of my thoughts about this week. Hope this video helped. Did remember to like and subscribe and stuff. Thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you in the next one.